Good morning. Oh, look, there's people are taking pictures. That's so, thank you. So nice of you. We feel so honored. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time, but we want to kind of tune this to make sure it's a good use of your time. So will you raise your hand if you're a startup founder? Oh, just a couple. Okay, awesome, thank you. And then raise your hand if you are based in the US. Okay, so that gives us a sense of any other questions that we have. How many of you are building a consumer-facing business? Okay, it's like about half. What else do you want to know about the folks out here?
Well, what does everyone else do who wasn't a founder?
Okay, raise your hand if you're an investor. There's two, okay. Or if you work at a startup, raise your hand. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm super excited that we're going to have a chance to chat. We've been friends for a long time. We've worked together for a long time. Jen is based in New York City. She doesn't get out here all that often, so it's really a treat for us to have a chat.
Aileen was one of the first believers in Rent the Runway, so it's amazing to have that continuity over the decade of building the company. And I apologize for my voice. 2 kids at home, so constant sickness.
Yes, constant sickness. Actually, Jen, I had heard about Rent the Runway, and I reached out to Jen and her co-founder, Jenny, and I would be like, hey, I'm going to be in town. Do you guys want to grab coffee? I'd just love to hear how things are going. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, sure. And then I would book a flight, and I would fly from California to New York and take them out for coffee. So that happened for a couple months, and then I was fortunate enough to have the chance to invest in Rent the Runway. And that was, we were a different business. Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about, because I think if you are a startup founder, if you're working in a startup, the Rent the Runway story, which is still just getting started, I feel like there's so much ahead. But maybe talk a little bit about, getting started in the early years. What was hard, and how did what was hard change over time?
Yeah, so when I started Rent the Runway, I was 27 years old. I had never managed people before. I certainly had never managed functions as diverse as the functions that we needed to be successful. And so I think that one of the hardest things about scaling a startup is scaling from being an individual contributor yourself. Like at the early days of a company, you have founders, you have a founding team, and everyone's an individual contributor, meaning you're all doing everything. You're all writing the copy on email, you're all taking out the garbage, you're all answering customer service calls, you're all reviewing the product roadmap. Then your startup scales a bit, and you are managing individual contributors. So you're still close to the work product. And then there becomes a phase where you have to scale, where you're managing the leaders of other individual contributors. So you're managing leaders. And you're further away from the product itself. I'm nowhere near the person today who's writing the email. But I still have to have both the awareness of what's going on the ground level and be able to be also at the 10,000-foot level, understanding and kind of inspiring people around a vision. So I think getting to really be able to do that over time is one of the hardest things about the journey.
And how did you learn? How did you get the feedback that your mindset had to change, or that you had to elevate your management skills, your communication skills? I know another thing that I've heard from some of the CEOs that I've gotten to work with over the years is it gets frustrating because you love participating in meetings. You love saying what you think about a product, and then at a certain point, basically when you say a little thing that you think is not a big deal because you're just being a contributor in a meeting, then everyone changes what they were doing, and it can cause challenges because they don't think of you as just a contributor in a meeting anymore. You're the big boss.
Yeah, I think realizing and kind of very much internalizing the impact that your words, your body language, your behaviors actually have on the company. In the beginning of something, you're just one of the team members. Mm-hmm. So you could kind of have a bad day, potentially be more blasé in a meeting, and everyone will know, oh, maybe your boyfriend just broke up with you and you're being more blasé in the meeting. When the team gets bigger, they're looking to you, the leader, the CEO, for their full inspiration, and they're taking every single word that you say literally. and they're looking at your body language. And so taking that seriously, understanding that every leader and founder, and this happens way quicker than you give it credit for. If you have a team of 10 people, this will start to happen, where people will take you a lot more seriously than you even take yourself. And I think that being conscious of the impact that you're having on those around you is your job to do as the CEO. It's not anyone else's job to modify their behavior to you. You have to modify your style and your actions to everyone around you to make sure everyone feels comfortable. I think that the primary feeling that I'm looking for in every relationship that I have in my life, whether that's at work or outside of work, my primary feeling is the feeling of ease. If you feel comfortable with someone, and if it feels like an easy environment, that's where you're being authentic. And so figuring out how you can contribute in your own environment to a feeling of ease, I think, is the most important thing you can do, especially in the early days of a business.
And then in parallel, like the topic is pioneering an industry, right? Like when you started Rent the Runway, what year was it? It was
2009.
2009. Like everybody was buying everything, right? Like renting. I remember when we were trying to tell people about Rent the Runway, a lot of people were like, well, why would I, like something that someone else has worn, like, I don't know if I could ever do that, right? And it started out with special occasions, right? And so talk a little bit about convincing people to change behavior, convincing people that there was a really big market that we were going after when the market did not exist.
Yeah, I mean, there's three audiences that you need to convince. You need to convince customers, you need to convince investors, and we needed to convince the industry, which was our suppliers. That's how we would be able to access inventory. So just for a moment, let's talk about investors. We came up with the idea for Rent the Runway prior to the sharing economy existing in this country. So the only sharing economy company that existed at the time was Netflix. There was no Spotify, there was no Uber, there was no Airbnb, you get it. So we had to convince investors of really the demographic trends that were happening around us that would lead towards the sharing economy and something like access over ownership being prolific in our lives. We also had to convince investors about the changing retail economy, the fact that people wanted to spend less time offline in retail stores, that actually we were going to start buying and renting more things online, and how that was going to change our behavior. So I really think so much about the early days when all you have is a big idea, is about almost being a sociologist or a journalist of like, here are all the market forces that are making this idea relevant right now and making this idea something that could get even more momentum over time. People have to believe that this is the right time for the idea and that people will start to do the behavior. I think it's really important from a consumer standpoint, and this also helped us with investors, to understand that my belief set is there's almost no new ideas. And Rent the Runway is not a new idea. So what does Rent the Runway do? It allows you to wear a new outfit every day. It allows you to have your closet in the cloud, put your wardrobe on rotation. Well, that exists. It existed before us. It's called buying things in fast fashion. Buying things from a store that's selling you a high quantity of items super cheap. So right now, the average American, and actually the average woman globally, buys 68 articles of clothing per year. She's only doing that because of stores like H&M or Zara or Amazon who are enabling her to buy a high quantity at low prices. So as opposed to reinventing the wheel, I was able to say to investors, hey, we're just faster fashion for the 21st century. We're giving you even more variety with the real thing in a sustainable way, in a way that's smart, and in a way that doesn't actually end up with a whole closet full of clothes that you don't wear. So think about, is there a behavior that already exists that you can utilize to prove out your thesis. And that behavior that existed for decades prior to Rent the Runway was people buying a lot of clothes every single year.
Or even, I mean, Rent the Runway started with special occasion for the most part,
Yeah.
right? We talked about like the Cinderella Experience, which had, I think, pros and cons in terms of like the pros, like people could understand it, right? It's
Yeah.
really special. It's an incredible way to brand, but it also is very precious, right? And so moving the brand away from something that was so precious into something every day was also, I think, a big shift. But at the time, like fast fashion wasn't even as popular as it has been in the past 5 or 10 years. But people were basically buying dresses at Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom's or Neiman and wearing them with the tags on and then returning them. That's what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of prove out that the behavior exists, and kind of telling those stories and recognizing that, like, you're not brilliant. Like, your idea is not brilliant. Your idea is just an iteration for today. Like, that almost helps tell the story in a better way because there's less to believe. If I'm inventing something completely new in the universe, there is a lot that a consumer or an investor would have to believe. So I think that it is to your advantage to basically tell an idea that's really about iteration. Now, in reality, having a closet in the cloud, my customers today are using the service 120 days of the year as a substitution for getting dressed out of their closet. That's clearly disruptive behavior, and it's clearly something that no one's ever done before. But had I described the behavior in that disruptive of a way in the early days, there's no way we would have ever been able to raise money, in my opinion.
So what do you think of the things that, I mean, I think you are probably one of the best fundraisers I've ever experienced, as when Jen and Jenny gave their fundraising presentation at my former firm, Kleiner Perkins. It was the only time, I think I had already been there for like 8 or 10 years or maybe, that they got a standing ovation from the partnership, which was pretty impressive. Like, why do you think, like, what did you do? Talk about your special sauce around fundraising.
I have no idea because I've never seen anyone else fundraise before, so I can't, compare. But first of all, I absolutely love what I do. I've been working on Rent the Runway for 11 years. I actually had zero intention growing up to ever be an entrepreneur. I was passionate about this idea, about giving women the power to express themselves however they want every day. And I think that that is giving them basically the key to self-empowerment. And I was really passionate about democratizing an industry and giving everyone access to have their closet in the cloud. So I think that that passion probably shows through, that I'm not just doing this to be an entrepreneur, which has become quite glamorized, that everyone thinks that this is their ticket to either freedom or it's their ticket to money or success. And let me just tell you, like 11 years of working 24 hours a day, of not being able to shower without thinking about Rent the Runway, of not being able to sleep without thinking about Rent the Runway, you better love what it is you're setting out to do. And I think that that comes through. I think the focus on team and recruiting has always been there, and people, because inevitably the idea is the easiest part. It's the execution that is always 99% of the job, and you're not executing anything on your own. You're executing it with a team of really talented people. So the ability to bring great people around me, to have those people grow and want to stay at Rent the Runway, even have some of those people come to Rent the Runway, leave, and then come back.
Yep.
I think that all of those things might have been.
Well, okay, I will add a couple things.
Okay.
One of the things, your first VP at Rent the Runway was a VP of?
Data.
Data. And at the time, that was very unusual, right? But Rent the Runway, an incredible logistics and supply chain, both like buying inventory smart, basically building like a Sabre system to be able to know what was going to be in stock, what was going to be in inventory when, and like how far away was the dress, when was it going to come back, when can you promise it to the next customer? Like that was all built in-house. And so I think that was a really smart hire at a time when people were not hiring heads of data.
But that's also an understanding of people and an understanding of yourself. I was aware of the fact that I had a lot of customer-oriented vision. a lot of team-oriented vision, but that I needed a yin to my yang in terms of how I thought about the world. And I needed a visionary as it related to data, because data is the competitive advantage of our business. It informs how we've built our operation, how we think about inventory, which are the two biggest kind of expenses of my business.
And so you hired a VP of data very early, before we really had much of a business.
Before we had data.
How did you convince?
We didn't have data.
How did you convince a world-class data scientist to come be the VP of data when we had no business?
I think it's about spending quantity time with someone. I think fundamentally people only want to work for someone who they love and not just for an idea. And I think that we spent time, we took walks together, we had long lunches and meals together. It wasn't just a work-oriented conversation, because he at the time was making a move where he was changing cities. He was figuring out, not only do I believe in whatever the iteration of this idea is right now, Rent the Runway, but do I believe in Jen? And interestingly, he was with me for 10 years, and he is now moved. First of all, I see him for dinner all the time still. He's now founding his own company, and he's moving a block away from me. He comes to my family's Passover Seders. Like, he's literally a part of my family, which is so incredible that you can, I think building real relationships with people fundamentally is the saving grace, what you have to do as a founder.
Yeah.
You cannot think of this as just a business.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say is, there's an old saying, retail is detail, right? E-commerce is, there's just a lot of details, and every penny matters. And you had incredible vision in your pitch, but you had incredible backup slides.
Yeah.
There was not a question an investor could ask you where you were not
oh my God, I get so frustrated by entrepreneurs coming to me, and they don't know the numbers. They don't know any of the financials behind their own business, let alone the financials of the market. It's like, don't waste someone's time if you don't know every single question that you could be asked and you can't back that up with a number. So before you go and you meet with another, entrepreneur that you want to be your mentor or an investor, you better have everyone in your orbit ask you 400 questions about your pitch, and so that you're basically rehearsing. You'll figure out what the most commonly asked questions are, and then you have to figure out how to answer those questions with data or with numbers. If you just come in with your gut feeling, it will never, ever be successful.
Yes, I think you basically had analyzed, what if this happened? What if this happens? If this price went up, if this cost went down, if this customer acquisition changed, you had analyzed it from every single angle. I don't think you had a slide.
Because you have to analyze it from the mindset of the investor. You have to think about, what are they going to be worried about? What are the biggest risks associated with whatever I'm talking about right now? And let me pre-answer that. Let me actually address the thing that they're worried about prior to them bringing it up, because that gives them more confidence that I'm being truthful, as opposed to the fact that I'm hiding the fact that, of course, there's risk in my business. I'm 11 years into my business now, and there's a lot less risk than there was, a decade ago, but there's still risk. And so even when I speak to investors today, I talk about the risks preemptively.
So I feel like you're starting to talk like a CEO who's thinking about maybe running a public company.
Well, I certainly want to run a public company. Hopefully that'll be Rent the Runway. Yeah, I think that I see a long runway or Rent the Runway ahead of us, and that we're just at the beginning of building out this closet in the cloud and having people start to think about their wardrobes in a new way.
Just anecdotally, I don't know how many of you have experienced Rent the Runway, or I know people in New York City who have moved their apartments to be closer to a Rent the Runway store, because it just makes it easier to basically make it literally your closet.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. But you're literally changing people's living decisions.
Yeah, and there's so many things that are changing this year that if you haven't signed up for a subscription, sign up now and you will see actually every quarter over quarter this year, there are going to be massive improvements to the customer experience, especially if you live here on the West Coast, that even as just a business person, I think it's interesting to see iterative change in a product experience over time and how a company thinks about that.
And you have some announcements coming later this week?
We have some big announcements coming later this week and some more coming later this month. So, it's fun. Like, fundamentally, I just want everyone in the audience to think about, like, what is fun for you? This has just been the joy of my life to build this company. I have fun every single day. I absolutely love it. And I think that fun and ease are the two sustaining attributes where I'm more excited about my own business now than I was at the beginning, which I think is important if you're going to make this your life vocation.
Yeah, it's not easy. There are ups and downs, but
Certainly.
I think you're an incredible role model and testament to having a vision and both, I think, doing the hard work to bring the skill to bear to see it to light. And I think it's a joy to see what's happening with the company and what's ahead.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Jen. Thank you so much for having us.